February 20th, 2021, and this is part 5 of American history. We left off last talking about approach on the Civil War time, and we were a little bit on to moving forward with that. We also want to touch back on some things in relation to what was taking place during that time that we kind of went past. One was that we discussed last time that the British Loyalist Tory were the ones who founded the Democratic Party in 1828. We skipped over the fact of some important issues that took place that we didn't touch on. I want to touch real quick on. One would have been that in 1812, the War of 1812, which was the Second Revolutionary War, took place in 1812, where Great Britain attempted to again attack and overthrow America. The thing with the British Tory then that we wanted to talk about was that they aided and assisted Great Britain. So I just wanted to touch on that base to let people know that in the due diligence of research, understand that the Tory were always allying with Great Britain, loyal to Great Britain. That's why they were known as the Tory British Loyalists. And in the War of 1812, a lot of the reconnaissance that was done for Great Britain to understand its attempted attack on the United States again was given to them by the collaboration of the Tories acting in treason with them. Records of this is in the archives. The federal archives don't deny this. Again, too, we also had southern incidents of civil upset between the Tories and the Patriot Americans during the second attack of the War of 1812. So just to understand, the point of this was to make clear that the animosity of the Tories and their goal of not wanting to see success in the United States of America continued. And after the United States had become the United States with the ratification of the Constitution in 1789, the Tories still rebelled against that. They wanted to keep things as what it was prior, and where they could maintain control over the laws and the ways that they regulate that of the territories they controlled. So the battle ensued all the way up to the point of where we reached to the Civil War. So when we look at the time from when we had the founding of our nation to the point of the Civil War, we're looking at a period from 1776 up to 1861, which would have meant 85 years. So in 85 years, we faced a second attempt. We actually faced 3 wars up to this point. We had the first war that we fought as an independent nation with the Barbary Islamic Muslims. They were enslaving our people and capturing our ships and demanding a jizya tax from us. And we started to learn about the totalitarianism of the regime of the Islamic Muslims. And within the first administration of George Washington, they were declared the enemies of America. Under the second administration of John Adams, they were declared the enemies of America. Under Thomas Jefferson, they were declared the enemies of America. And it would be Thomas Jefferson who would lead the first war against the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. And then, again, we would see the second war with the totalitarian Islamic Muslims following the War of 1812 and 1815 with James Madison. So I just wanted to go over, those are important facts. And as we progress forward and we go back and forth, we may touch on those things again, because forward history reflects back on the past history. And though we're not covering those in detail now, we will cover them when we start to see the effects of these things on the United States coming forward in the future and even in our current time right now. But we're going to leave off picking up with where we had the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And I pulled up a few things. This is Black History Month. So there's some things I wanted to talk about in relation to Black History Month. One, I don't agree with a divisive view of black-white history. We keep talking about how we're an all-inclusive nation of one people of all equal, but yet all these things and where we have the divisive nature of dividing things by color, race, of which I even seen one where a black American was mentioning about that if racism and racist was not really truly an issue in America, why do we have we request the information on government applications and employment applications and so many where you have to disclose if you're black or white, right? If it was not, isn't that a form of discrimination in itself? And that's the same thing I feel about everything. If we're really that nation of one people of all equal, we shouldn't have such an ignorant perspective of requirement of information where we have to disclose the one thing that we claim is any reference to as a discriminatory event. But also, too, we have the confounding of history today by many. So we're going to touch on some of the truth of history so that it's understood that most of the things we see of what's dividing us today are propagated lies, fallacies, and twisted history that just doesn't have any real substance of truth. But the evidence is clear to what I'm about to show you that exists within the Federal Archives, and evidence of fact in our history that show that the issues of racism we speak about today really are nothing compared to what they really were in truth during the time. So let's just take a quick look at what was going on back then. We have here, right, Dixie censors subject black slave owners. This is something that you won't see in Black History Month. They won't want to talk about the issue because it doesn't fit the agenda of the Democrats and the left to bring up the issue of the fact that from the first developing of the continent of the United States, before it was the United States, while it was still under Great Britain's rule, I want to bring up, I don't have it up, let me just bring this up here real quick so we can touch on it. As I said, remind me, I do these things to get an idea of what I want. I bring up some things related to the information I want to touch on. And so some of it, it's mostly a lot of it, I got to ad-lib too because it's just off the top of my head I do these things. Anthony Johnson is who I'm looking for. Okay, and the reason we're looking for this guy here is Anthony Johnson, and this goes back in the early 1700s, actually right around, I think it was 1640. He had, this is a free black a man who was on the American continent back in that time, and he had an Irish slave, and he also had a black African slave who ran away from him. This guy fought in a court of Virginia to get back the right to his slaves. In the court hearing, the Irish slave proved that he was an indentured servant and was able to finish out his indenturement and then be released from Anthony Johnson. But the black African slave, Anthony Johnson, had paperwork to prove that he had purchased him as an actual slave. And it was his case here in Virginia that established the first legal precedence in the new continent of America to be able to own another human being as property, as a slave for all their natural life. Because John Cassar, who was the slave, who was under Anthony Johnson's, I don't know what you would say, but he owned him, okay, and he was ordered by the court to serve all his natural life as a slave to Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson in his time as well and then forward is well known, his family forward, for being large plantation owners, property owners. See, these things you won't hear about in black history was that free black people actually own land here, plantations here, and they own black slaves here and white Irish indentured slaves, okay, and they also bred slaves, sold slaves, and traded in black slaves. This is like things that you won't hear in Black History Month, that if we were to hear, we'd realize that slavery was not really a white and black issue. This is the propagated lies of what it's directed at today, is to create a divisive nature between people to keep our nation divided. But I just wanted to touch on these things and then go back also forward here to what I'm talking about here, the subject of black slave owners. This goes back to the point right before the Civil War in 1856, and where I'll include links to this. You can read about these things. And like here, it says the large numbers of free black Negroes own black slaves. In fact, this is something that you want to say, because I wanted to touch on this, because you hear that today, like black Americans that are among the Democratic controlled districts around, and the confoundment they get from history, one, because they're deprived of proper education by the Democrats intentionally. So they really don't have knowledge. This way here, verbally, I'm doing it because I also understand that when the Democratic controlled minority cities and districts mostly have a very high illiteracy rate, so writing comments or things about this kind of leaves them in the dark because they can't read it. And I'm not picking on them, it's just because it's a manufactured society by that of the Democrats to keep them illiterate so they can't read, because they only, like the Democrats saying, or which I say in most every video, the Democrats like to say that they choose truth over facts. Well, in the Democratic controlled districts of mostly the minority black communities that they control, they tell them that what they want them to believe to be the truth, and they don't have to worry about them finding the facts because, like I said, they keep them illiterate where they can't read. But if they were to know the facts, of which verbally I can tell them these facts, they might be able to think and reconsider things for themselves and try to understand how they're being played for the fools they're being played for by the Democrats. But anyway, when we hear from them in there right now, like what Black Lives Matter speaks about the proportionate between that large majority of that of white in America compared to that of the small minority of that of black in America, that whites commit way more greater crimes than that of blacks, though the proportionate amount of the ratio for blacks within their own communities, which in honesty with me, I don't believe it's because of black or white. It's because of manufactured society by that of the governing authorities over it, I think, are the cause of the crime and the issues that are being faced in these communities. It has really nothing to do with black or white. But I just want to say, on the basis of those proportionate, so they can understand, okay, if you want to see it that way, let's look at it that way to what took place in that time and understand this. The fact is, large numbers of free Negroes owned black slaves, in fact, in numbers disproportionate to their representation in society at large. In 1860, only a small minority of whites owned slaves, according to the U.S. Consensus Report for that last year before the Civil War. There were nearly 27 million whites in the country. Some 8 million of them lived in the slaveholding states. The census also determined that there were fewer than 385,000 individuals who owned slaves. Even if all slaveholders had been white, that would amount to only 1.4% of whites in the country, or 4.8% of the southern whites owning one or more slaves. Now, in the rare instance when the ownership of slavery by free Negroes is acknowledged in the history books, justification centers on the claim that black slave masters were simply individuals who purchased the freedom of a spouse or a child from a white slaveholder and had been unable to legally manumit them. Although this did indeed happen at times, it was a misrepresentation in the majority of instances, one in which debunked by records of the prior owned blacks who owned slaves. These include individuals such as Justice Angle and Mistress L. Harry of Collections Districts of South Carolina, who each owned 84 slaves in 1830. In fact, in 1830, a fourth of the free Negroes slave masters in South Carolina owned 10 or more on average. So understand, this is something that you won't hear about in black history, but black history needs to consider these facts. When you speak about reparations, are we going to go back as well and seek reparations from all, like the Ellison family, the Johnson family, and Justice Angle family, and the Horry family? Because these were free blacks who owned literally hundreds of slaves in their lifetime and bought, traded, and bred slaves for sale in their lifetime, and they were free blacks. And when we look at this fact, which I'll include an article of this, and this is based off the facts and the principles of evidence of the census that were done in that time. So it's unquestionable. It's just unquestionable. And this is things you have to, and when you look at these things and realize the truth of what I'm saying, I'm not trying to pinpoint off or take from anybody, because I'll tell you what, too, as we move a little bit forward, you're going to understand there was white slaves, too, and in the world around America, there existed twice as many white slaves as there was black slaves. And this is another fact, unquestionable fact. The thing of it is that in America, even in America, believe it or not, the first slaves here in the continent of America sent over by Great Britain were white, Irish, and Scottish slaves, not black African slaves. And that was because the kings of Great Britain in the time when the continent was founded here, well, they didn't really care for there had been black slavery going on since 640 AD. The slave trade for black Africans started in 640 AD, and that was like 1,200 years before the continent of America was founded. The black African slave trade was founded by the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. And they invaded North Africa in 640 AD, and after invading there, they only pretty much converted that of the tribal leaders so that they could maintain power with them and that they would be cooperative with them. But the majority of the rest of the African people in that time were either innocent tribal people who practiced out of the ideology of whatever it was of their theology or ideology of practice of tribal people, or they were Jewish or Christian. And Muslims didn't want to change that, because if they were to convert all Africans to being Muslims, well, you couldn't enslave a Muslim if he was black or white. It didn't matter. You couldn't enslave a Muslim. It was against their Sharia law and that of the tenets of their Islam. So they preferred to keep them either Jewish, Christian, or that of whatever their tribal ideology was, so that way they had an ability to be able to slave them and sell them as slaves. So, and as well, the majority of all the slaves in the transatlantic slave trade under British rule, when the Britons had imported literally hundreds of thousands, even near millions of slaves into the American continent, all those slaves were purchased by the kings of Great Britain from the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. It was not the European Americans who had founded the black slave trade. This is just a mythical lie of twisted facts in history. So that I just wanted to make that clear. Now, I'll include links to these things so we can understand. Right here it talks about white slavery, what the Scots already know, and this is a story I'll include that's a fact that's known from records and things that took place back in the first developing of the continent of America when the British kings decided to start establishing developments here of like cities and a place of colonies for like import and export of things to start being able to function. To build those places, he sent in that of the common Irish and Scottish slaves that the kings of Great Britain had enslaved. And mostly in Great Britain, during the time while slavery was going on here, there was twice as many white slaves throughout Great Britain who were labored to death just as harshly as that of the black slaves were labored on the farms here on the American continent. Working over there, the white slaves would work in the subterranean brass, steel, and copper mines. Men, women, and children, they didn't discriminate on anything. But kings of Great Britain really didn't care for the African slaves. They didn't want them in their country, so they were kind of, I guess you could say in a way, racist like the Muslims were. And they preferred to just enslave their own people and use their own people as slaves. So the majority of all the slaves in Great Britain, throughout Great Britain, Scotland, Ireland, and England were white slaves. So, I mean, it was, like I say, the blacks did not have a cornered market on slavery, though they want to think that way today. And, they think about it from that of a twisted version of history that has been whitewashed out and just totally twisted into a bunch of lies, only for the divisive nature of keeping this nation divided and to try and keep society of the American people at constant civil upset with each other. And the truth kind of, when you look at the truth, kind of really debunks all that stuff. And if we were to be able to get everybody to look at the truth for real, we would realize that slavery was not a matter of black and white people. It was a matter of humanity and inhumanity. So let's continue on here. I have here, too, I'll include this graph here, shows a graph of free African American populations in the U.S. from 1790 to 1860. Right before the Civil War. And as you can see, proportionately, the reason I have this here is because, as I said in other videos, that the United States of America really had nothing whatsoever to do with black African slavery or any slavery. Matter of fact, like I say, the reason of the cause of the War of Independence was because the white colonists, as well as the free black colonists, because there was many free blacks in the colonies at that time when the Revolutionary War fought out. Matter of fact, there's black American heroes of the Revolutionary War that fought for independence with the white American colonists. And actually, back in that time, there was no real white or black. You were either a free man or you were a slave. And there was, like I said, there was many Irish, and there was many Scottish, and there was many English slaves, and European slaves as well. Christian, you could be enslaved for being Christians, and Muslims enslaved many Christians and sold them as slaves around the world as well as Oriental. The Chinese were selling slaves. I mean, it was a common practice back in that time. But you can see proportionately here throughout the years as we move forward, by decade to decade, the amount of rising numbers of free blacks in America, in the continent of America, and especially when you look at the point from 1790, after America had enacted its Constitution, is where these things proportionately take off. And you see, because as America, the United States of America was progressing, and new states being admitted and territories developed, they were being admitted and developed as free states and free territories where slavery was abolished. So by the time we reach up to the Civil War era, to where we're at in history, we find that there was 19 free established Constitution of the United States of America, and there was 15 slave states. At first there was 13, but then you had Texas and North Carolina eventually joined the Confederacy, and then it turned to 15. So that's how it progressed, and that's how it was. But like I say, when we look at this point, remember this, when we look back at the statistics, you read these things, you'll find out during this time that actually by population ratio, the black population of free blacks owned more black slaves than that of the white men in America. So, these are things people need to consider within reality. And I don't say that because I say black Americans were more responsible for slavery than white Americans. I'm just saying that in truth, it was not a white or black issue. It was, again, a humanity issue or inhumanity issue. But let's move forward and see here. Now, I also mentioned earlier William Ellison. This is something I want to bring up that reflects from this time as well as today. And I didn't bring this up, so I'm going to bring this up right here so people can kind of get an understanding of where I'm going. And we're going to visit this again in the future as it goes. These are just important facts I want to make sure we don't forget. Just give me one second. Now, this is something I want to bring up. You see here Keith Ellison, right? And I brought up here about William Ellison, right? And you notice this guy here is the first Nation of Islam, Islamic Muslim congressman in America. And he actually is from the ancestry of this man here who owned slaves. And a free black man who is a Muslim could not be enslaved. And usually had some kind of a privilege with the Islamic Muslims, and was as well cooperating with them and acting as a slave trader, dealer, breeder, and what have you. I just want to bring up this point because I want to connect these two so you understand, you don't lose sight of this. William Ellis and Keith Ellison, these are two of the same heritage from each other, and this man's ancestry goes back to being these Ellisons here. And these Ellisons were some of the family of the largest black, they were free black Africans back in that time who owned the majority of the largest of black slaves in the country in their time. They were long-standing, and they were long from 1790 forward with the Ellison family in breeding, dealing, and trading in black African slaves. So I just want to bring that up so people understand that there's a tie between this and that comes into the future. I just didn't want to forget that. This will give you something to indulge in, to understand this was the first Islamic Muslim to ever be able to elect it in the United States Congress. Now, mind you, as I said prior, the first administration under George Washington, the second administration under John Adams, the third administration under Thomas Jefferson, and the fourth administration under James Madison all had mainly declared the Islamic Muslims the enemies of the American people in the United States of America. This is an unquestionable fact of which, if we look here, this is an actual letter from George Washington. And in this letter here, George Washington states from that, in reference to that of the first war with the totalitarian barbarian Islamic Muslims, in referencing about finding out why these people were attacking our ships in the early days, he says here, would to the heavens we had a navy able to reform those enemies to mankind or crush them into non-existence. So this is what George Washington felt about the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. He considered them not only the enemies of the American people in the United States, but also the enemies of all mankind. You see here, and his resolve to them dealing with these people after research and study by that of our founders was, in his opinion, the best thing to do would be crush them into non-existence. So understand, these are harsh words from our first president of the United States. And I know today you have people try to make it out where Thomas Jefferson was a friend of the Muslims. Well, this is another fabricated, propagated lie by the left of who we know today. The left is allied with the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. And as I remind people, back in this time here where we're talking about, as we approach even up to the Civil War prior, was the British Loyalist Tories. As well, understand that, you know, the Tories were still purchasing slaves even after America condemned it. I believe it was in 1812 we condemned the importation of slaves, but they were still smuggling in slaves that they were purchasing from the totalitarian Islamic Muslims off of the coast of Florida at that time, which was still owned by Spain. So they had an alliance back then with the Islamic Muslims because they were the primary provider to them of their African slaves. So these are all things I'm just saying so people understand, tie these things together and understand that they're important facts of history. And I understand, like I say, we're talking 244 years of history. We're trying to progress through this. I'm trying to touch on important points that I can. And I get people say my videos are too long and I talk too fast, so I'm trying to do it slower, which results in a longer video. And I'm also trying to cover all the critical importance things that I feel affect us to this very day and are a great effect right now to the nation's division that we're seeing right now, as well as the very position we're in the state of near our republic collapsing and falling into a state of civil war again. So understand, I'm trying to touch on these bases because they're very important. But in relation to that of, like, here we had, when we looked at the issues going on with slavery today and the Islamic Muslims today and what have you, and they say about, like, Thomas Jefferson was a friend of the Muslims. Well, understand, Thomas Jefferson made the comments that they speak of in his younger, ignorant days, and where he did not really have an understanding of Islam and what it was about. But this is where Thomas Jefferson wrote, right here, it says, the ambassador answered us, and Jefferson wrote, that it was written in their Quran that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them whenever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners. He's speaking of the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. And it would be Thomas Jefferson who would lead the first war against the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. Doesn't sound like much of a friend to Islam to me. He agreed with George Washington that probably would be best to wipe them off the face of the earth. Thomas Jefferson applied many times to Congress, seeking out to build a military strong enough of a navy that could go over and literally do what Washington suggested, crush them into non-existence. But we had resistance from that of the spending for the money to be put out for the Navy large enough to do such a thing. And we would not see the potential to be able to do that thing until James Madison, of which when we get to that point we'll review that. But James Madison was the man who led the second war in 1815 against the totalitarian Islamic Muslims. And it was pretty clear that we could have crushed them into non-existence. But quickly they came into working out, as we can see from documents within the Federal Archives, of which I've shown in other videos here, a peace treaty and working out because the Muslims realized they don't want to get destroyed. They decided to work out and be humble about it, and they didn't demand their jizya tax on us or extorting us anymore, and they agreed to stop attacking our ships and enslaving our people. So there was a resolve under James Madison, and since the point of James Madison and his declaring them the known and to be declared enemies of the United States of America and the American people, they stayed away from us, we stayed away from them. We worked within the commerce of what we could within trade and amicability within the travels of the seas around the world. We agreed to just disagree and leave each other alone. And they stay where they stay, we stay where we are, and that's just the way it was working out. But so now we get back to the point of where we left off in history. These things were just important I want to touch on. Some, like I say, for black history. Here's some black history you won't see this month because I don't like to talk about this. The Democrat likes to keep the divisive nature of things on a racial issue, of which if we spoke about the truth of it, we realized there was no racial issue. It was like, again, as I said, a humanity issue. So these things will be included for people to consider in looking at these things for the truth of history and as we progress forward. So now we left off and where at the point we've seen Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Okay, and we covered just now the past points up until this point, some important facts that we had to touch on, and some of them in relation to black history this month so we can get the truth of those things. Now, following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, we would be faced with what would take place with this guy here, and this is Andrew Johnson. Now, Andrew Johnson to me is known as the father of rhinos. He was a Democrat in the North Carolina region, and he played an allegiance with that of keeping the Union together. He didn't agree with he made a stance as he didn't agree with the Confederacy, the Democrats' Confederate slave states. He stayed with that the Union should stay together. But this guy turned out to be a rhino, more than likely, kind of like the issue we see today with Mike Pence and Donald Trump. Was kind of like the issue probably with Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was a Mike Pence. He was a traitor within who was probably sharing the secrets of everything that Abraham Lincoln was doing with the Democrats, so they were fully aware. And more than likely, and it is, I believe, when you look at the letters and the facts of things like back in this time here, letters and things that were even said by Marcellus Cassius Clay and some of the other founders in that time, like Thomas Jefferson even, well, not in that time, but at the time of, oh God, who was the other guy I was thinking of? It'll come to me. But there's another fellow in letters that he wrote that are in the Federal Archives that kind of hinted that even they believed that Andrew Johnson might have been the one who assisted the assassination, giving them information to when would be the proper or best place to take the shot for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And it was done right after Abraham Lincoln was approached with the Wade Davis bill. Now, Abraham Lincoln in a Reconstruction was making it really, really clear that what he wanted was that all the Democrats who would let me go back here because I don't even have over where we're at right now. So let me go back. Andrew Johnson, at the time, Abraham Lincoln wanted to have it where the Democrats would have the Democratic public. You see, he understood many of the people under the control of the states with the Democratic Confederate slave states. They really wanted to stay with the Union, but out of fear of what we talked about, the great hanging in Gainesville, Texas, in the last video, we understood what the Democratic Confederates did to the people who seemed loyal to the Republic of the United States. They would hang them, kill their wives and children, burn their homes to the ground. They were just inhumane people. So, Lincoln offered for the Reconstruction that if they took an oath of allegiance to that of the Constitutional Republic of the United States of America, they could be reinstated as citizens, except for those who were of high command with the Democratic Party's Confederate states, such as Jefferson Davis, the president, and those of the Confederate Army and military and generals and what have you. They would be held accountable, and he had most of them already sentenced to go to death for treason against the United States. But now, with the Wade Davis bill, was a bill that was going to be introduced to try to aid with the Reconstruction. Lincoln pocket vetoed the Wade Davis bill because it didn't have strong enough language for him to make sure that the Democratic Party would be completely dissolved in America, which we talked on a little bit in the other one, and I don't have it up, and I should have had this up. But we're going to look at this Lincoln's real quick. Two things I want to bring up. One is about Lincoln's statement about what he said about a house divided, and the other, so we have it up for reference, is the Wade Davis bill. So we have these things for reference here. So this is the Wade Davis bill, what I speak of, and it was an unsuccessful attempt by radical Republicans and others in the U.S. history of Congress to set Reconstruction policies before the end of the Civil War. Okay, now Lincoln wanted, the reason he pocket vetoed this bill was they didn't have strong enough language in it. Lincoln wanted to make sure that the Democratic Party would be dissolved and never to be able to rise again in this country. He wanted all of those of the true Tory Democrats to be completely unable to ever have citizenship declared in this nation or to be able to vote or hold a position in our government in this nation. He wanted to make sure that the Republic was safe as what it was established under Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution, where it guarantees only that of a Republican form of government and a single-party system is what we were founded. But, you see, they believed that it was Andrew Johnson who, in recognizing that the Wade Davis bill was being pocket vetoed, and he understood the strongness in what Lincoln wanted, that he may have relayed this back to the Democrats, and the Democrats realized that with the normal progression of what Lincoln was doing with the Reconstruction, had he had the Wade Davis bill on top of it with that of the demands he wanted, they would be pretty much abolished in this nation, and there would be no allowing for a Democratic Party to exist, and the Tories would literally be able to be acceptably shunned by that of the American people, and they would be held accountable for what their principles were. We were not going to go forward with the constant tyranny of these people within. But that was probably why they killed Abraham Lincoln. And they also did it because they knew this guy, like I said, was the father of rhinos, Andrew Johnson. He was a traitor to the nation. He was a true Democrat, and he knew the whole time what he was doing. And after they killed Lincoln, this guy becomes the president. Now, we can see that through the progression of him, this guy progresses out forward. He goes ahead and stops the executions of all the Confederate soldiers that were sentenced to death by Lincoln. He stops the executions. Then he goes ahead, all Confederate soldiers gain presidential pardons. You see, this was in 1868 when he did this. This, of course, took a progression. The Confederate States of American records you can find right here. These have in the Federal Archives. You can now find online all of the proclamations of general pardons and amnesty by Jefferson Davis. And then also by Andrew Johnson. This was his pardon. He even pardoned the traitor Jefferson Davis and held him from being executed. So, and now Andrew Johnson's pardons of the Confederate, John C. Shelton, I got all these things. These were people that were already sentenced to death by Lincoln, but he overturned it as president. The impeachments of Andrew Johnson. This guy faced 11 attempted impeachments. And I think kind of like what we see happening today with Donald Trump was kind of like what the Democrats trying to take a vengeance from back what was done here with Andrew Johnson. In multiple, he's the record holder for the most impeachments ever on a president in United States history. And he also faced several times threats of hanging for treason. By the Republicans and that of the true patriot Americans because of what the things he was doing. He readmitted the Democrats back into the House and the Congress. He pardoned, like we say, all the military men, including Jefferson Davis, the president of the Democratic Party's Confederate slave states. He allowed them to be free. This led to very upsetting things in the United States that we're still suffering and paying for this very day. When we consider that this was 160 years ago, and that in the last 160 years in the progression all the way up to this very day, The Democrats, of the Tory Democrats, have remained the same, and so is their goal and their vision. But in this time here, following now is the acts of Andrew Johnson, pardoning all these people, allowing them to stay, putting them back in the government. What they did was they formed the Ku Klux Klan. It was founded by the Democrats. And this was founded by a group of Confederate veterans. And it was says here, too, and I know there was a Buford guy was the first Grand Wizard of them. Most important in the country. This might have something in here. But anyway, the Ku Klux Klan was an organization that was established to suppress that of the now free blacks in being able to exercise their right, not only to free blacks, but as well white Republicans. This is an important thing most people don't know, and like I say, when we realize, like I say, I get some people confused. They get confused about the Tory, me saying the Tory Democrats and the British Loyalists and how you associate these things. People don't realize it was the British Loyalists, of the treasonous enemies within of the British Loyalists, that we were at civil conflict from the time of the Revolutionary War forward throughout all the way this time, the first 83 years up to the Civil War. They were loyal to Great Britain, and they were of the elitist royal families of the Scottish and of Ireland, and under the kings of Great Britain. And they were snobbish, self-proclaimed elitist people who felt they were superiorist to everybody else in the world and that everybody should be there to serve them. Kind of like the rich, snobbish, self-proclaimed elitist scumbags of the monarchies of kings and queens who think they have some kind of special blood more than that of the common man. But like here, I want to put out the name of the Ku Klux Klan was derived from the Greek word kiklos, meaning circle, and the Scottish Gaelic word clan, which was probably chosen for the sake of alterations. Under a platform of philosophized white racial superiority, the group employed violence as a means of pushing back Reconstruction and its enfranchisement of African Americans. Former Confederate General, here it is, Nathan Bedford Forrest, was the KKK's first Grand Wizard, and he took that position in 1869. So, I just want to... And these were all Confederates, so they were Democrats. Okay, the Democrats were the founders of the Ku Klux Klan. And as we see in the progression as we go forward, you're going to find out that the Democrats and their Ku Klux Klan terrorist organization plays an important role in all of the issues we face going forward. And even to this very day, within the last 160 years, the primary cause of all civil upset in this nation was instigated and rest upon that of the manufacturing of the issues under the Democratic Party. And this is a fact, the truth everyone's going to have to face by the time we conclude all this in history. We see here something that's very important to understand. The Klan, which always, now this is an important thing because this is the fact. In the federal archives, you see, we have letters in the federal archives that show, which I mentioned in the last video, about the Confederate flag and how it was a loyalty flag to Great Britain, representative of that of the Scottish Loyalists and that of the Ireland Loyalists to the kings of Great Britain. And what people don't understand is that the facts made clear, is like in this story here, I'll include this. This was a very good story, I felt. From its beginning, okay, the Klan, which has always claimed British roots, is organizing throughout Scotland and England. Okay, and understand this is true. The Ku Klux Klan is an ancient order that goes back. That's why you have the knights of it. It's a knights organization. And weirdly, if you do the due diligence and deep research and study, you find out this was kind of like a clan of hired assassins who were, in truth, really had no allegiance to any god. They were atheists, but they learned how to use that of the ideology of whatever people were of their god as a foundational principle to be able to infiltrate those people and accomplish the task of what they wanted to do for causing the civil upset or weakening the civil society of those people as they were being employed to do. So, and that's what the Ku Klux Klan was. It was a clan of disorder, civil disobedience, anarchy. This is what they would do. They go in and they cause all these things to help weaken a nation for that of a foreign leader to be able to move in and overthrow that nation, or disrupt that nation just for that nation to be destroyed. And that's what their order comes from. And it comes from an ancient time before the time of the 1861 era or 1865 era in the United States. It was an order that was known of by the British Loyalist Tory, because that's where it does stem from, and its roots does go back to Scotland and England. And this is what we're saying. This is how the association. And people want to think today that those associations died. They thought that the Tories, when you hear the Democrats, the propaganda they put out, they try to tell you, oh no, the Tories left, they went to Canada, they went back to England, and it was over with. No, that's a lie. They never left. and their agendas never changed. As you can see here, at the time we're looking back now at the Ku Klux Klan and its uprising after the Civil War, is 90 years after the Revolutionary War, and they're still on board for that agenda. And you're going to find out throughout all of the next 160 years of our American history, that agenda continues, and there's unprecedented facts to prove this. So we're going to continue on with it. But I just want to make a point, we'll include this here where people can understand the association of Great Britain and the British roots of that, of the Scottish and the Irish, in relation to the Ku Klux Klan and its true roots of where it rested. And mind you, this Klan still exists from ancient times right now in Scotland, Ireland, and Great Britain this day. So just understand that. Now, here we have the economics of American farm unrest, and this was during 1865 to the 1900s. And this is, I have an important thing, because now we're going to get back on track to the effects of the Democrats being readmitted back into our government, and they're forming the Ku Klux Klan, and how it started to affect America. During the whole progress up to the Civil War, America was entering into an economical boom in this nation. Following the Civil War, that economical boom took off within the farming districts, and out of just incredible innovations and technology advancements. We had in the 1870s to 1890s electricity, telephone, steel, and labor, as they say. And I'll include this here. This is the impact of the Civil War. Great articles here about the advancement in brief that gives a good understanding of the history as we move forward through American history and the things that of innovation and the industrial boom that was taking place. In the 1890s, the assembly line, mass transit, the radio, and how all these things came to be in America. We know of like 1886, where we had Carl Benz applied for the patent for his vehicle powered by gas, the first car being invented. These things are all taking part in the economical boom. Some of the things people don't realize as well when we look today, because we always assume society to be the society we're in right now. But in times of back during the whole time, from the Revolutionary War up to the times of the Civil War, in truth, in society back in those days, a woman at the age of 13 was being probably courted by a man at the age of 15 who had already staked out his land and was building his house and setting roots for his farm at 15 years old. The majority, the average age of the soldier during the Revolutionary War, even the Civil War, was between the ages of 14 and 16. And today, that's considered a child of an immature state that isn't even responsible enough to consider to be able to get a job or work or even vote, because they're so because of liberalism. They've been weakened down to an immaturity and that they no longer mature as what they used to back in the days of in these times. Today, you find many of these disgraceful, shameful young men in America are 20, 25 years old, still living in the basement of their mother, playing video games and don't even have a job. They may have attended college already, even up to the age of from 18 to 22, and still can't find a job because they took a degree in political science or something stupid that has no real job availability for them out there, and they just live with their parents still, like irresponsible, disgraceful. They make the country look very weak, such men. But I'm just saying, back in this time here, when you look at here, this is the Breaker Boys, woodwork coal breakers in Kingston, Pennsylvania. This is during the late 1800s. These things continued. And mind you, when you look at this picture, if it comes up bigger, let's see if we can zoom in on it. If you take a close look here, you'll realize these are kids. These are kids between the ages of 12 to 16 years old, and they were miners. They were not miners as in young kids. They were actually miners, like coal miners, gold miners. You know what I'm saying? They worked for a living. And most of these kids at this age here probably were courting a wife, looking for land to build a house at 15 years old. And to be honest with you, it's funny with me. I was in a hurry to get out of high school and get on my own because I read about these things and I thought everybody did. You should be out. You should be out of the house by the time you're 15, 16. You should be a man. But in our time, it was different. And obviously, that's the way it is. It's getting worse progressively because of liberalism. Today, now we have men 25, 30 years old still living home or with their parents or their grandparents, as if they're still damn children in this country. It's disgraceful. This is a weakening of the masculinity of man, which we cannot allow to continue in this nation. We can see from past experience that that younger age, we can have American posterity becoming more mature and responsible at far younger ages than 25 and 30 years old in this country. If we just get off the backs of the idiocy of the liberalism that weakens a man down to be that of just disgraceful and shameful account of humanity, in my opinion, anyway. But I just wanted to show this here so we can see it as a progression during in the future of time. We see here again in another thing in reference to time as it's progressing through, just to talk about the industrial boom that was taking place following the Civil War, in spite of the Democrats with their terrorist organization of the Ku Klux Klan forming, and them continuing on with their racial issues and their attempted divisive issues and trying to actually debunk the United States and destroy us or stop us from making progress forward. They were always the enemies within, and even after the Civil War, the Democrats remained the enemies within. We can't forget it was the Democrats who formed the Confederate slave states and caused the Civil War of 1861. This is an undeniable fact. And we can't deny that after the Civil War, of which, as we progress, you're going to see, they were pretty much the cause of all civil, divisive nature issues that we face in this country from all throughout that time and all the way to this very day. But this is to touch on the booms that were going on, the assembly line coming, we had so many things, the train, the steam engine, the industrial boom in factory, plastics being discovered, you name it, as we progress from the late 1800s into the 1900s. Was an amazing time in America and its development. Here's about the assembly line and production of the cars and the first gas cars from Henry Ford and what have you appearing here in the United States. And then what we look at, though, here is something I want to touch on. What is the Knights of Labor Union? Now today, as we know, and then throughout history we know, that the Democrats mostly favor that of the unions, right, the labor unions. And most people today always wonder, why does the conservative Republican reject the unions? Well, because anybody who actually does the due diligence in understanding the research of American history understands where the union started, what its intent was, and who used it for that intent. And that would be the Ku Klux Klan and the Democrats. The Democrats formed in 1869 the Knights Labor Union. It was called the Knights Labor Union to reflect that it was going to be something under the control of the Ku Klux Klan. But it would be managed in a sense of that of the professionals of the Ku Klux Klan, out of their normal pointy hats and gowns. They would act more as that, as like attempting. What they did was the labor boom was going on. There was many jobs. During this time here, where we're looking at from 1869 forward, with the factories booming up, the industrial boom going on, the northern states developing, the railroads developing, so many things happening at such a fast pace in America in innovation, that the black now Americans who were now free were as well thriving in this country, doing great. Many black communities were finding great success, and many in the industrial boom were seeking the now free black Americans because they had really good work ethics. They were proud free people now. The alliance between the now free blacks and the white Republicans was stable across the country. They were hand in hand working together. There was no real racial issues, to be honest with you, when you look at it outside of that of the things trying to be attempted or established or constructed by that of the Democratic racists. And we would find that if you read the papers in the archives during these times, from 1869 forward, you see in the newspapers in the southern states with the Democrats of the former Confederate slave states complaining about the blacks are stealing their jobs. And it wasn't really that the black American was stealing the Democrats' jobs. It's just the Democrats were elitist, self-proclaimed elitist scumbags that were lazy and not very good workers, and nobody wanted to hire them because they were lazy, no good workers. Okay? And most of the businessmen and hardworking people were that of the Republican class, what still is to this day, as we know. And back in this time, the majority of all black Americans were Republicans, and there was a unified nation of one people of all equal between the Republicans of white and black. Matter of fact, to the point when you look back in history, you don't ever see anything of a mention of white or black people outside of when it's mentioned in that of the construct of that of the racial divide trying to be created by the Democrats. And during this time here, what the Knights of Labor was where now, and then we have this problem today. It's a cowardly Republicans. The businessman is a soft-skinned man who doesn't have the brash in him. He's no Marcellus Cassius Clay. He's no Barr. You know, you remember Barr, who was the Vice President Thomas Jefferson killed Hamilton in a duel. Today we don't have Marcellus Cassius Clay kind of Republicans, and then even then, by this point, we didn't have that brassy, strong, spirited warrior man in the Republicans. We did, but the majority of them were soft-skinned businessmen who were not the fighting type. So the Ku Klux Klan knew they could go in and threaten these people, threaten their families, terrorize them, and they would submit. And then what they would do is they would submit and they would give in, and the Democrats were demanding that their Klan members be put into the higher paying positions within the factory jobs as foremen and what have you. And then as they gave in and they placed these people in these higher positions, then the Democrats in the foreman positions now would fire off the black minorities that were working in these industrial jobs, and they would hire in their Klansmen. And this is what the Knights Labor Union was established to do. It was to muscle its way in through terroristic tactics of that of the Ku Klux Klan, threatening that of the soft-skinned businessman in the Republican Party to give in and allow them to come in and pay them higher jobs. This, as we progress forward, started to affect the economy, especially within the farming districts down south. Though with the industrial boom going on, as a result of the Knights Labor Union and the labor push and dominance by that of the terrorist acts of the Democrats during this time, started to affect the economy nationwide and worldwide, especially when we look at many people had bought bonds within the farming districts of the United States in that time. We can look back and see in the late 1800s the effects that took place on Brazil and other countries that had taken bonds within the commodities exchange that was taking place in the United States at that time, that took big losses on it because of the oppression that was going on with the Knights Labor Union within the farming districts of the southern states, and the Democrats taking over and not being very good workers, lazy people. Well, it affected the ability to generate revenues, which affected the economy, which affected the commodities exchange in relation to it, and it cost a lot of people a lot of money. And it eventually was the downfall that would lead, as we move forward, you'll see, to the Great Depression. But let's move forward now. We'll see. The Knights of Labor was established again, like I say here. This was 1869, named the Noble Orders of the Knights of Labor. It was a thing that was founded by the Democratic Party's Ku Klux Klan organization as a terrorist organization that would now attack and use its terror tactics against that of white Republican business owners and that of minority black free Americans now working within the industrial boom to displace them and put their Ku Klux Klan members in charge of these now booming industrial industry jobs going on across the nation as they grow. We see the progression of this going forward, and we see the economical effects of it. Farmers face hardship. Is this something I'll include in this? You can see in the point what I'm speaking about. There was a point where the Democrats used the unions that they developed with the Ku Klux Klan to as well, kind of like what they were trying to do, which, and actually too, if you look in, I believe it's Webster's dictionary, anybody can go and look up the definition for master and servant. I didn't include this in here, but I'll have to find the evidence to it, but you can find it if you have a dictionary. You look up master and servant, or employer-employee relationship, and you'll find that this was established during this time. It comes up to where there was actually debates within the legal scholar position of that of the unions and those of Democrats who had become lawyers, where they had debated the definition to reflect that of a master-servant relationship between an employer and an employee. The business owners of the Democrats tried to establish that in where they would transition that of the master of the slave owner and the slave being, instead of a slave, a laborer. Okay, and it was actually to the point where it reached a point. Like I said, they were trying to undo what was done in the Civil War the whole time. They never gave up. And this took place back in, it was in 1889, going into 1890, that these Webster Merriam Dictionary terms were changed by that of the pressure of the Ku Klux Klan, and where an employer was considered to be the master and an employee was considered to be the servant to the master. They wanted to, because they were planning on eventually reverting things back to the way they were. This was part of the progression of the propaganda that would lay the groundwork for what they wanted to do. And as we progress forward, you will see the aggression as we get into the 1900s of how aggressive they were and actually trying to turn things back to that point. And I just want to say, so we understand, this is what was going on in America in the late 1800s, through the 1800s, going up from the Civil War forward. We had the industrial boom. We had, like I said, we had Andrew Johnson, who was the guy who gave the Democrats the right to vote back, put them back into the Congress and the Senate, allowed them to be back in our government. And the results of what we're seeing forward and what we're talking about, touching on now, about the revolutionary boom taking place, and then the effects from the Ku Klux Klan Knights of Labor unions. And this is why the conservative Republicans don't like unions, because we understand the Knights of Labor unions were formed by the Ku Klux Klan as a terrorist organization to harass and tie up the hands of the business owner and force him to be compliant with them within their racial desires and goals, and controlling the industrial boom and disenfranchising the black free Americans now from the industrial boom and out of the higher paying jobs. As we progress forward, though, I'll tell you right now, in this time here, as we go forward, we realize that though the farmers had hardship, black communities were still prospering with the alliance between that of black and white Republican Americans. They were prospering. There was communities popping up all over the place. The now free Republican blacks and whites were working together. Black Americans were getting educated. There was doctors. They were starting to become bankers. You had communities like what was known as Tulsa, Oklahoma, with Black Wall Street. You had large wealth starting to be recognized by developing black communities that were working with the white Republican communities together in a coexistence together. That was wonderful in that time, resulting in many successful communities, including by guidance of bankers working together, advising them and giving them good direction of the Republican Party. They would purchase land in Texas and hit oil. This would add to the wealth of that, and many of these people would benefit from that wealth and sending off their children to the northern states to attend college and get degrees and become, management. They would start their own supermarket stores within their communities, because also during this time, you have to remember, we had going on from the Democrats after they had the Knights Labor Union. They also started to push for that of the Jim Crow laws, separate but equal laws, segregation laws. While we were trying to progress forward in the Republic of the United States of America as a unified people of one people of all equal, the Democrats kept progressing forward and trying to divide the nation and revert things back to the way they were in the past. And their whole method was nothing but destructive, manufactured issues by them to cause an upset and disruption in the progress of what the United States of America was actually trying to do. How long they persisted in it is just amazing, because it's still going on to this day. It's been going on now for 160 years. And I just wanted to touch on these things. And as we go forward, we're going to see about, the opportunities and things that took place with the great rise of many of the communities in that time. And so where are we at here now? I'm just trying to see where I went up to. Okay, so we got up to the point here now where we're ending in the late 1800s, right? We have the industrial boom going on. We have many of the now free blacks prospering in the industrial boom. We have many successful black and white communities working together at this time as a Republican form of government, with a Republican Party of black and white coexisting together in a unified position where black communities were prospering in spite of that of the Democrats' Jim Crow laws and the separate but equal laws and the segregation acts that are going on, being pushed by them, as well as them being disenfranchised out of the industrial boom by that of the Knights Labor Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, Democratic Party's Ku Klux Klan's Knights of Labor unions, pushing them out and disenfranchising them from the industrial boom. They started to develop, as I said. We had areas like Tulsa, Oklahoma starting to develop. They were striking oil. There was large plantation tracts bought in Florida, and they were prospering greatly in the farming districts in Florida area. So at this point, things were going pretty good. And I mention these things because we have Black History Month this month. And these are the truth and the facts of things that blacks should be considering these facts instead of the propagated lies that they're always being fed to keep people divided. The goal, I believe, like I say, we're going to leave off with this today. We're going to pick up from this going into the 1900s on the next section where we're going into it. I hope everybody enjoyed the video up to this point. I'll include links, as I always do. I have to go to the YouTube channel, upload this to that channel, and then include those links on that. And then I'll put a copy back on my Facebook page so you can get it. And you can look at all the links of all the things that we reviewed in this video, and you can have them for your own due diligence and study and understanding what I'm saying, and read it up on your own and do a little study on your own and get a gist of the truth of what really took place in our history. If you're somebody from an inner city area, of a minority or what have you, or somebody who doesn't have a strong education or ability to read, find a friend who does. Listen to the video again, have them pull up the links, and together learn about the truth, because the truth is important. We have many events coming in America soon by the true Americans of that of a true unified nation, of actual conservative, of all color and races and creeds of nationality in this nation, that are right now unifying and getting ready to face the concerns we have in America right now with our deteriorating republic under the disgraceful acts of what we've been witnessing with the corruption and abuse by government that has taken place and finally hit ahead within this past election, and where we realize we're at the brink of losing our republic, and if we, the people, don't do something, and that's coming. And it's a unified effort by all people of a single, like the nation was supposed to be, of a one people movement, of one people of all equal. And like I say, you know, when you look, if you're a black American and you're looking at Black History Month, and, you know, I would say look toward people like Ben Carson, Candace Owens, somebody who's actually taken the time to study the history I'm showing you and woken to the facts of the truth of that history, and is out there advocating for the truth over that of the lies. Now, you'll hear the old saying, like I say, I'm going to leave off with this: Joe Biden and the Democrats say that they choose truth over facts. The reason that is because they like to tell you what they want you to believe to be the truth, and they know should you look at the facts, of which I'm showing you now, the facts, you'll find out their truth is lies, not the truth. So with that, I'm going to leave everybody off. I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll pick back up now going into the 1900s, the early 1900s, of the development and evolution of America as we progress forward and who we are. Understand, as all of this, we are the greatest nation of the greatest people that ever existed on the earth. We still are, and will always be as long as we maintain this republic and we live on to be who we established ourselves to be. I'm a proud American. I'm a strong American man. I believe in masculinity and strongness of men. I believe that all Americans should be armed and well trained as militia. And, that's what we're aiming at and what we should be. And that's what our Constitution and our founders call for. It's how we maintain our freedom for 244 years. Hopefully, we can understand the truth of our history and who we are and the principles and values of what we stand by in our great nation, so blessed by God and established under that, and is well ratified within that, the Constitution, which consents to this government, in the name of our great God, Jesus Christ himself. And, I just hope people in this country take the time to listen to my videos, indulge themselves in the due diligence to study the things I include with these videos, and themselves become familiar and know the truth. It's our responsibility, it's our duty as Americans to know these things, to preserve this truth for that of our American posterity. So with that, I thank everybody for taking the time to watch my video, if you watched it to the very end. And I hope you found it knowledgeable, and I hope I include enough information for you and details that leads you enough to become some way able to find your own path within your learning and understanding of the truth of American history, and that in that truth you find yourself growing to be a better person, a better American, and that we better together stay unified and move forward to reach and accomplish the goal of what our founders wanted, of which any true American would want, for us to reach that goal of really coming to the peak of that, of the one nation of one people of all equal, the true foundation of being who we are, the Americans. Thank you for watching my video. Thank you for your time. Everybody have a God-blessed weekend, and I'll see you on the next video I make relating either to history or another thing of which I'm going to be doing another video probably tomorrow, but offer from history. It's going to be in relation to the current events and times and things of what we're facing right now that we need to really deeply consider. But again, thank you all for taking the time to watch my video, and I will see you tomorrow or Monday on my next video. Thanks, and have a great weekend.